Chapter 311, Going Crazy. April 29th, 629. Amara's steps hastened as John walked through the line. All around her, she could hear the sounds of echoing chatter and rolling metal. Troops all around were either repairing enough damage to the wall so that they could at least function normally and restore supply lines, or were mustering equipment and kickstarting the tanks. She felt the collective aura of Iron Legion bristling. The climaxing intensity of the previous battle, which was being called the Battle of Heaven's Fire, had already simmered down over the past 2 days. However, it was clear that this was only the beginning. The atmosphere boiled with righteous retribution. A recent report said that around 4,000 troops had been killed, the first to die after the line was built. While any general throughout both the church and kingdom would say that a mere 4,000 in exchange for over 3 million scourge was an exchange rate unprecedented in human history, Iron Legion soldiers believed otherwise. Each life was far more valuable. Iron Legion had a small combat-capable army of no more than 80,000. Every soldier was important and was treated as such. Vast amounts of wealth were spent to ensure that no soldier would die meaninglessly, and that every soldier would be capable of eradicating 1,000 times their number. Iron Legion didn't tolerate a mindset like the Kingdom, who threw away hundreds of thousands of lives and then cared for nothing more than redistribution. Therefore, 4,000 lost lives was unacceptable. That it occurred at the hands of a sovereign only made it slightly more understandable. But that didn't make it any more bearable for anyone involved. Now, Iron Legion was about to demand another pound of flesh. 3 million kills weren't enough to satisfy. It was merely the expectation, and that was predicated on little to no Iron Legion deaths. Now that they had lost comrades, they were demanding more. And John Cooper intended to oblige. He always had. Amara remained by John's side as they moved through the garages. They passed by dozens of super heavy tanks, and that was just what was within the wall. Soon, they had left the interior and exited to the front of the wall. There they found the rest of the soldiers and vehicles mustering for deployment, as well as literal hills of corpses. Harvesters actively pushed mounds of corpses like snow plows. Despite that, the ground was still covered in a layer of ground meat and blood. The bloodthorn was still growing and eating, overtaking some acres of ground and growing up the wall as carnivorous vines. Thousands of vehicles were lined up and prepared to roll, every single one freshly stocked with weeks of supplies necessary to operate in the field. Super heavy tanks divided each unit, all of them flanked by medium tanks, armored transports, and turret trucks. The amount of armament being moved was mind-boggling. Amara had seen the reports of similar things happening near the other hardpoints. This mustering was a majority of what the entirety of Iron Legion could bring to bear, only essential units being left behind in the line for logistics and recovery. They were going to hunt down the fleeing Scourge forces. Unlike most, though, Amara knew that John intended to do far more. General Gaffney. John found the general near the command tank. The man looked ragged, yet the gleam in his eye was sharp. Commander, 1st Brigade is almost ready to move. Good. I just wanted to walk through. It seems like everything is in order. As much as it can be, sir. Your troops are eager to roll. As are you, it seems. The general just nodded, John inspecting the tanks around them. Amara recalled a recent conversation of theirs. John had personally conducted recovery efforts across the wall in order to regain order. Many people had died, and those jobs had been vacated. Troops needed to be moved around so that essential jobs were filled, but even more importantly, someone needed to give direction. John hadn't slept at all since he had first stepped foot in the wall after the Sovereign started moving. Even after the battle concluded, he had gone straight into work. Even now, he couldn't actually see with his eyes, his aura and mind the only 2 things he was relying on to navigate the world. Amara wished he would get at least a night of sleep, but she also understood that in John's mind, the battle hadn't actually ended. He was fighting his own battle, and both of them knew that as soon as he rested, he'd go into recovery mode. At this moment, he couldn't afford taking that time off, not with his army in disarray. Not to mention the coordination efforts to muster everyone for pursuit. Chief Ironheart hadn't even recovered from the last battle, and yet John was pulling him along. Like most of the other troops, both John and Ironheart would be rolling with the tanks and living the field life for as long as their pursuit was active. Amara was going to be with them, as were all the Desert Eagles. Nearly all of the special teams were leaving the line, intent on continuing their efforts, just aimed at different targets. They had already received the gear and ordnance from Wonderland. Amara had gawked at some of them, thinking them overkill at first. Then John told her what they'd be used against, and she realized they'd barely be enough. She watched John nod at what was around him. "Keep up the good work, General. I'm going to make the rounds. Let me know when we're ready." "Yes, sir." The general saluted and left to enter his tank, Amara raising her head as John turned to her. "Care to take a stroll?" "Of course." She smiled and linked with his arm, the two heading to other tanks. For the next couple hours, John bounced between squads and assisted with their ongoings, doing maintenance on tank interiors, checking armor, configuring ordnance, checklisting supplies, and all of the other menial tasks the surrounding troops were carrying out. He also spoke to them, answered questions, and gave his insights. John seldom interacted with the troops on a personal level, primarily because he simply didn't have the time to. Those at Sector 4 got the most opportunities to speak with him, and even they didn't get to so much as see him most of the time. Now, though, Amara watched as so many troops jumped at the opportunity to converse with him. John's renown had spread far and wide, especially in Iron Legion, where people could feel the effects of his influence. He was nothing short of legendary, the most powerful summoner to ever live, the icon of humanity's potential, the face of fear the Scourge couldn't stand against. He was a celebrity strolling through Iron Legion ranks, and to Amara's dismay, so was she. John Cooper's wife had already been known for her incredible spells, stories circulating about her battles in Sector 4. There were few people who hadn't seen what John called her laser beam, which she used to kill a behemoth in front of the wall. Hundreds of soldiers wanted pictures, all of them taking out their aerial, standard issue or otherwise, and surrounding the couple. At some point, a line was formed, and it only grew larger with every minute. Entire platoons and companies were moving up to get pictures before long, and only scurrying away when their commanding officers started yelling. Then, when General Gaffney finally lit the green light, the troops dispersed, and John retreated to one of the transport vehicles reserved for him and the Desert Eagles. As some of the super heavy tanks started to drive forward to take point, Amara turned to John and commented, "I'm surprised you let them take your picture. Not that your face isn't already everywhere." "Well, it's of no consequence now." "What do you mean?" Amara's steps slowed as John's did. He stared at her with a soft smile. "This is it, Amara. For Iron Legion. I don't follow. When this campaign is over, Iron Legion is going to dissolve." "What makes you so sure? Who could possibly dissolve this army after all you've accomplished? Not to mention that Ironheart has made himself known as a sovereign. You've been running the news and papers like crazy these past 2 days with the success in the recent battle. Everyone knows what you've done, so I can't rationalize how they could touch you, let alone take down Iron Legion." John was silent for a moment, lighting a cigar and blowing some smoke. "As soon as we step off here, Iron Legion's fate is sealed. It's not a matter of if, but when." "Explain." "We're too good at what we do. I'm too good at what I do. Iron Legion is too successful under my leadership, and they can't have that. They're going to do something. I have my ideas about what, but I won't know for certain until it happens. They've gotten smarter with their aerials. Most of the Third Claw just doesn't have them anymore, so I'm having trouble spying on them, and I'm not going to risk my agents for intel. I don't believe they have the power to take you down if you don't want to be." "Well, you'd be correct. They don't. You're going to let them." Amara muttered, scarcely believing what was being said. "You're going to give up this army to the kingdom?" "Of course not, dear." He sighed, pulling Amara into a wide hug. She accepted it, confusion across her face. "I didn't mean to alarm you. I can feel it coming. I know something is coming. Something is going to happen, somewhere, sometime. Ever since we won the battle, I felt the symphony shift. The crescendo has passed. I just don't like that there's an end. It doesn't even annoy me anymore. It's just saddening." Amara suddenly calmed in his arms, realizing what he was saying. She looked up, reaching over and stroking his face, bringing his gaze down to hers. "It'll be all right. No matter what changes or how the symphony shifts, we'll figure it out together. Let me be your one constant. That much you can rely on." "Yes, you're right. I can hear you too. Constant, but so harmonious." He smiled fondly at her, the two exchanging a kiss before continuing their walk. That's when Amara decided to broach the topic. "By the way, what's with this symphony you keep talking about? Ironheart told me about your mentions of it." "You mean you don't hear it?" but it's all around us. No, I don't hear it. There's no musical sound that my magic detects either. Are you sure it's a symphony you're hearing? Of course. Nothing else around us could possibly be so harmonious, so organized. I've always reveled in its sound. Always. Amara looked up at him, seeing him return the gaze. John, you've never mentioned it before. Are you trying to say that you've always heard this symphony? Of course. All my memories are filled with its presence. He smiled while gazing off into the distance, then slowly came to a stop, the look on his face frozen. Amara just watched him think, her concern growing. That's weird, right? I've never talked about it before, but I talk about it now. There's no reason I would have hidden it. Did I only just start hearing it? Amara's face fell, seeing the confusion on his face. John, are you okay? I don't know. I can't remember when I started hearing it, nor when I didn't. I may have logged some things about it a few weeks ago, but it was vague, so I couldn't know if that was when it started. I thought others were able to hear it. Is that why General Gaffney needed to be told to sound the alarm? Amara remained silent, feeling something in her stomach drop. He looked at her. Am I going crazy? I think you're just sensing things other people can't. Maybe it's the Great Barrier. Or it could be a new way of understanding something. I don't think you're going crazy, though. At the very least, I don't think we should jump to a conclusion about something we don't understand. She spoke carefully, John staring at her for a long while before nodding. I guess you're right. Now, let's go join our friends for this hunt. I've been waiting for this moment for a long time. She smiled and followed, the two boarding the transport with the rest of the Desert Eagles. And they followed the formation of super heavy tanks, kilotons of armor rolling across the gored battlefield under the command of their general and commander. Their first target, the remnants of the defeated Scourge army. Chapter 312, Reality's Melodious Strings. May 1st, 629. The Scourge is in sight, Commander. Very good. I nodded at General Gaffney's shout, standing atop the super heavy command tank as it barreled toward our objective. In line with us were hundreds of other tanks and thousands of troops. The song was maintaining. Perhaps it rose an octave, but it did not shift in intensity. There would be nothing outside of expectations here. I spoke into my aerial. 2nd Regiment, begin your flank. There was a response. Then a few seconds before a chunk of our army split off. Comprised of gunships hovering overhead and medium tanks, 2nd Regiment throttled forward at nearly double our speed, no longer held back by the pace of the super heavy tanks. We were closing the distance between us and the remnant Scourge army. They still numbered in the hundreds of thousands, but such a large army couldn't run forever. They were currently stationary, surrounding a nest for sustenance. All around them were clouds of spores and thick biomat. The lands were barren red, not a tree or animal in sight for hundreds of miles. We were pushing toward not just the Scourge army, but their establishments and infrastructure. We were the front line, the map actively redrawing with our advance. I muttered, my exosuit filtering the air and my voice reaching nobody's ears. Antares softened them up. A few seconds after, a squadron of jets buzzed past overhead, shooting toward the army. Bays opened, and then bombs dropped. They tore away before the bombs could hit the ground, massive explosions blowing apart the nest as they flew away for resupply and reruns. With Amara's new mobile supply teleporters, those planes only needed to fly over our supply trucks to retrieve fresh payloads. Granted, those supply trucks could be considered mobile warehouses themselves, stationed in the rear and guarded heavily. After those explosions went off, I looked up toward a sequential cluster of large planes several thousand feet up in the sky. Sticking out from their sides were large-bore cannons and rapid-fire autocannons. The planes tilted down and already aimed at their target. An artillery battery with wings, the lineup started their barrage right on time. Bright tracer streaks flew through the atmosphere and detonated on impact. With more precision, they could hit the dense clusters of monsters and break up biological structures in the nest. Autocannons started sweeping through, shredding behemoths and larger monsters with pinpoint aim and guided munitions. The escort squadrons around those gunships started speeding up as the Scourge recovered from the sudden attack. Winged monsters started rising to the sky, only to be met with an advanced barrage of gunfire and missiles from the planes and anti-air from ground units. The other troops started to swarm, first spreading out and away from the attacks, then turning toward our advance. As the Royals got their bearing and gave out their telepathic commands, The monstrous mass began its stampede straight toward us. But we were a metal wall, and with an all-com from the general, the tanks took aim. Fire! The word went out, and cannons erupted with rows of fire. Explosions shook my exosuit with visceral intensity, my audio systems dampening with every shot. I could see the shells as they flew, making impact with detonations of shrapnel and fire. The front line of monsters was eviscerated and yet more stampeded over them. One was replaced with 10, every 100 usurped by 1,000. Turrets from helicopters went to rapid fire, more tracers joining the gunships. I could sense the auto-loaders in the tanks around me moving at maximum speed. With recent modifications adding supply and skipper teleporters, their fire rates had tripled. Gone were hand-loading breaches. Skipper teleporters could simply pop a new shell into a breach after an auto-loader removed the spent shell and shut the housing. At their fastest, they could fire every half-second. The soldiers behind their turrets on tanks, trucks, and APCs clamped down their triggers and filled the air with simmering projectiles packed with mana and enchantments. I could feel their righteous fury fill our collective aura, a building scream of hatred that drowned the mustering charge of the Scourge. The tanks came to a halt and established their lines. The flanking forces reduced their speeds once in position, slowing to a crawl while lighting up the side of the Scourge army. After that, it was a simple slaughter. I lifted Totenstall within the metal hands of my exosuit and fired, releasing a barrage of burning lead, the barrel a soft, glowing red. Yet for the first time, my gunfire was drowned by the surrounding combat. No longer did I stand out on this stage, but that in itself was an applause, proof of my success. I had made an army better than anything I could be alone. Close to 1,000,000 monsters had been engaged, and yet before even a single monster could get within a mile, nearly 100,000 had been obliterated. More were following as the distance closed, soldiers jumping out of their transports and deploying barriers. The tanks acted as hardpoints, knights lining up behind deployable metal barricades enchanted with reinforcement and shields. They sprang to life, sealing the gaps between the tanks as they hunkered. The Scourge continued charging, and soon slammed against the barricades with the force of thousands. They raved as they clawed over the metal, shields flaring as poisonous magic flew from within the monstrous ranks. Knights met the beasts with spears and swords, employing the strength that they had always been meant to use. Warlocks behind them, wielding standard-issue foci better than anything they had acquired from the kingdom, slung their own spells over the heads of their shields and into the local hordes. Layers of metal, layers of shields, layers of firepower from all avenues and angles of attack. The Scourge could barely reach the tanks without being cut down to dregs, and those that did were met with primed blades and magic. Even as they swarmed the tanks, the turrets and cannons remained facing forward, launching their ordnance into the stampede where they would cause the most catastrophic damage. The monsters thought they just didn't care about their own, or naively trusted that they wouldn't reach them, until claws came down on feet of reinforced metal packed so full of magic and malice that they seared the poisonous magic within their bodies through nothing but touch. Even the tougher ones that cared not for the layers of magic would find their claws cracking as they swung at the metal. It may have dented, may have even cratered under the most powerful of blows, but it never broke. In the end, the monsters found themselves doing nothing but cosmetic damage before getting slaughtered by all manner of attack, whether knight, warlock, or turret fire from adjacent tanks. I stood atop the command tank all the while, watching the battle, listening to the flow. Despite the fluctuations, the intensity never changed. It was constant and stable. I wasn't concerned about surprises, for I could see the notes hidden behind the screens of observation data and recon reports. I could feel the tempo in the air, could hear it in the distance and within the anticipating minds of the royals. This was just the first battle, one that merely finished what the Scourge had started. The symphony wouldn't end here. No, the music would continue long after this battle. This time, though, I would be the conductor. No longer did I react to my enemy. No longer did I prepare. Everything I could have possibly done had been done. Every preparation, every study, every revelation and pluck of the world's strings had been precisely for this very phase of my operation. Euclid's anvil had ended some time ago. I didn't have a name for what we were doing now because it simply didn't matter to anyone around me. I may have known this would happen. I may have predicted everything down to nearly the day. But that didn't mean I had to expose my knowledge of the chords and times and pitches. I was not the only one listening to the symphony, and every string I had plucked had been heard. But it was all by design. Now, my troops did not play my tune, but their own. They did not move by my guidance. They moved by the general's. They did not fight through my motivations, but by their own righteous retribution. And yet my name was at the top of the score. My image was behind every story that has or will ever come out of these events and wars. My right arm operated Totenstall, firing controlled bursts at groups of monsters. My left arm raised after some time, my hand slowly moving beside my head before my fingers suddenly flicked, snatching a spike out of the air aimed straight for my helmet. The spike, a note not unheard, was tossed to the side, having served its purpose in the song of the universe. The source? Nothing more than another corpse after taking a blast from a nearby 5-inch shell. I really am going crazy. I chuckled and felt the symphony lighten. As multiple hours passed, troops started settling and winding down despite the nonstop fight. Shields still flared and monsters still charged, but only some injuries were sustained, and not a single death was withstood. With there being extremely few high authority royals still in the army, all those with any amount of strength were swiftly dispatched. My smile widened after the monster army started getting sparse. With some commands, the entrenchment was disbanded and barricades lowered. Tanks started rolling forward once more, turrets still firing, but with more intentional accuracy. Some monsters turned and ran right into the arms of the flanking force. Others threw themselves at the tanks in a savage, suicidal attempt to take something with them. None of them got any farther than the effective range of whatever blew them up. 10,000 by 10,000. Every monster was systematically slaughtered as the tanks rolled forward, gaining more ground. Gunships in the sky continued to fire endlessly at clusters of enemies, unable to be stopped. Winged enemies were easily brought down to the dirt after jets entered the fray, no longer able to pressure squadrons. They emptied their payloads without contention. The nest was long obliterated, yet the surrounding atmosphere was still laced with spores and toxic gases. Combined with the biomat, the land touched by the scourge was an ecological wasteland that I could hardly imagine turning back to normal even given centuries. I glanced at the screens in my vision, handed directly to my mind through psychic connections with my aerial. An alert was being thrown from our sensors. Something was approaching from the rear, but it wasn't Scourge. That much was impossible, and my mind quickly found the only other conclusion given the metrics coming from those underground detectors. When a jet split off to get a direct view, I got a live feed of exactly what it was. My smile widened a bit, my eyes snapping toward a lone flicker flying toward me. I put out my arm, the alley cat landing on my metal forearm. I recognized his black fur and plumage that drank in the light, and his eyes so blue they were like fragments of the ocean. Daywisp. It's been some time. It has, John Cooper. A voice didn't escape his fanged mouth. His words were more a suggestion of a voice made by Psyche, directly imparted to the mind rather than the senses. What brings you to this battlefield? Can I assume the army heading this way is your doing? No. In this place, I am merely a messenger, given the task because of my connection with you in history. There is a much more powerful leader making their way here. She wishes to meet with you. Very well then. I'll hold my reservations until she arrives. It should only be a quarter of a day. Less if I head toward them. I tuned into General Gaffney's aerial. General, I'm leaving to meet with potential reinforcements. Finish the fight and set up camp. Roger. A quick affirmative, and I jumped off the tank, sending a message to the others. Amara was busy with the rest of the Desert Eagles annihilating the rear of the Scourge lines with the flanking force. But with a moment, she took to the sky and arrived by my side. Although she was getting to the point where she could simply teleport herself until she broke the Great Barrier, rapid and frequent teleportation was too taxing to do with much more efficient alternatives. I tasked a helicopter, which landed nearby and allowed us to board. Before long, we were in the sky. Sometime later, we landed beside the moving flicker force. Composed of miraculous beasts of chimeric combinations and paragons of great power and renown, the force was a horde of color and excitement. Oddly enough, their symphony was muted. I had wondered why I couldn't hear them coming. Their sounds were like whispers coming from so far away. After landing, I noticed a few beasts split off from the main pack. They turned toward us, a variety composing the group. I saw lord beasts and a dragon, even a large alley cat. Only paragons. I waited, Daywisp flapping off my shoulder and onto the back of the lord beast. The leader, a massive lion-like paragon standing 8 feet tall on all fours and with a mane thicker than metal brushes, bristled with concealed yet regal power. The vigor was palpable, exerting mental force in the form of sheer, projected might. It was a ruler for good reason, and I sensed great intelligence behind it. Surprising, for a meathead beast. Still, what attracted my attention was the other alley cat, from which I could feel nearly nothing. The Lord Beast spoke first, her voice androgynous and physical, not mental. John Cooper. My name is Salipta, the head of this force. It is a pleasure to meet the leader of Iron Legion. The pleasure is mine, Salipta. I take it that you're here to join my fight? That is correct. We are here by the Seer's command, who has foreseen your assault across the north of the continent. This force is composed of the most powerful and experienced warriors we could muster, and we intend to fight alongside you for the duration of your campaign. A seer, huh? I learn more and more every day. My smile didn't go far. I knew that the sheet of this symphony was foreseen as I had guessed, but that didn't mean I liked the feeling of being foretold. I sighed internally and tried to rationalize how I'd play this out again. I had already done so when Daywisp showed up, but knowing there was a seer changed things. Chances are, if I was destined to be successful with Iron Legion alone, they wouldn't have come. That they were here meant the seer felt the necessity to send them anyway. So long as that leader had a modicum of intelligence, they wouldn't send a fighting force that would only get in my way. Something required their presence amidst my army. Even if it was as simple as reducing casualties, I was inclined to take the help. But then again, how much I trusted the clairvoyance of a beastly seer had to be questioned. Still, I'd give them the benefit of the doubt for now. After a second or so of thought, the Salipta looked at me with an odd gaze. I was told that you would understand why we were here, and that I wouldn't have to convince you to let us join. Those aren't the exact words the seer spoke to you, were they? No, they are not. To be precise, I was told that there would be no resistance to our initial accompaniment, and that we would be allowed to stay should we prove our might. Indeed, I'm starting to hate your seer. Keep going the way you were and meet us at our camp. I will call for a guide to lead you. Now, what about your sustenance? We feed on the corpses of hell. We feed on our enemies. Worry not for sustaining us. How convenient. I nodded, boarding the helicopter after giving a goodbye and heading back to the battlefield. I also relayed a few messages, letting those who it concerned know about our new reinforcements. At the same time, Amara looked at me weirdly. You agreed rather easily. Was it because of the seer? Yes, they saw something I have yet to know about. For now, I'm trusting in their judgment. Either way, high explosive shells are indiscriminate. If they get in the way, that's their fault. That's true. Still, hopefully we don't actually need them. Hopefully. I pondered, wondering what the Scourge still had in store for me. At the same time, I wondered when the other big players would show themselves. I had Chief Ironheart, but I had no doubt that anarchy was still lingering around somewhere on the continent. My advance would not be without resistance from the highest forces, and Ironheart couldn't handle anarchy alone. Anderson was the only one I knew of with that track record. It was a good thing I had him on speed dial. This seer all but confirmed that I wasn't completely ready, though. I hoped they were wrong. Then again, I doubted that even a seer could predict what I had brewing in the background. Who knew what an animal could truly divine from the future? I hardly intended on letting them interfere with my symphony, and as I expected, even as the Flicker and Paragon army charged toward the battlefield, there was little shift in the music of the universe. Maybe another instrument was added to the orchestra, a flute of natural imposition and order. But otherwise, the whole remained unchanged. I sat back and closed my eyes during our trip back, harmonizing my mind with the beauty of reality's melodious strings. Chapter 313, Finally Moving. May 2nd, 629. Well, they'll certainly multiply the size of our infantry. General Gaffney muttered while looking over lists of units in our army. Finding a place for the Flickers to fall into hadn't been that difficult. Unfortunately, it also wasn't as simple as telling them to follow along. They couldn't be commanded like troops could, but more importantly, their numbers dwarfed our infantry. There were around 28,000 Flickers and Paragons in the force that Salipta led. Given that the majority of our force was armored, they were around triple the size of our infantry. It was a good bolster to our close combat ranks, though. In the last battle, troops had deployed barriers between the tanks and fought from those, ensuring that we didn't allow the scourge to pierce through our line. However, we had taken more casualties. Not many, but enough to help my generals understand the reality of what we were pushing to do. We didn't have a large hands-on fighting force. But with these flickers, we would change that. It was part of why I wasn't very opposed to them joining us. They weren't necessarily expendable, but they also weren't my own troops. If they wanted to help us and suffer the brunt of close combat with the scourge, I wasn't going to stop them. And if they failed to integrate and got hurt or killed by our ordnance, then it was simply negligence on their part. I wasn't the one who had invited them, and while I would help preserve them as I did my own troops, I also wasn't going to kid myself and say that we would cooperate without conflict. Flickers and beasts fought differently from a systematic machine like Iron Legion. They didn't understand the nature of our armament, not to mention that they didn't possess the intelligence humans did anyway. That, combined with the unforgiving nature of our weapons, meant that mistakes would be paid for in death. It would be up to their leaders, the Paragons, to shepherd them and keep them in line. After Salipta showed up to the camp, I had made that fact abundantly clear to her. I hadn't beat around the bush either. Salipta had brought their best fighting force of flickers and paragons, but by extension, that meant they were veterans. They had adapted to their own fighting style and were unlikely to change unless forced. You couldn't teach an old dog new tricks that wasn't willing to bend. I didn't hesitate to help Salipta understand the consequences for stepping out of line or allowing her army to do so. It wasn't even about rules either. It was simply what would happen should they go against the tactics of my army. My eyes stared at the table map before me. On it was a full overview of the territories beyond our line and scourge establishments. They had made their mark on the landscape while we were defending. That much was made clear. Thankfully, we had worked on decimating the fog of war during our defense. Reconnaissance had constantly been carried out, planes capturing pictures and video of anything interesting they saw across the entirety of the continent's northern regions. Iron Legion was currently occupying the most western portions of the front line, and we needed to move east. To the most northeast corner of the continent was the Scourge's land bridge that they used to cross over from the Pillars of Creation. The land bridge wasn't large, and it was clear that it also wasn't the most convenient to cross. But it was enough with the biological logistics the Scourge employed. I had seen plenty of gargantuan intestines, and the one at that crossing was the largest one yet. It nearly filled the land bridge by itself, being miles upon miles wide. It was the only thing making influxes of millions of monsters possible. The Scourge never stopped pouring through it, only limited by its diameter like a pipe. Still, they went as far as terraforming the bridge, the intestine growing wider as they did. Over the past couple years, it had doubled in size. Given more time, it would double again. At some point, the Scourge's flow through that bridge would be unstoppable. They had an entire continent all to themselves that they used to supply fresh troops. I wouldn't be surprised to hear that there were tens of billions of monsters waiting over there. That was a more pessimistic outlook on their counts, but even my optimistic thoughts gave them a minimum of a few billion, with more combat-capable monsters than the entire population of humanity. Iron Legion was on the path to oblivion by most metrics. My plan was to ascend north before heading east, annihilating everything in our path. Every nest, every nexus, every city, every army. We would destroy them all, scorching the earth in our wake and driving the Scourge back all the way to the land bridge. Of course, I knew I wouldn't get what I wanted. I wouldn't be allowed to shore up new defensive lines on the exit of the land bridge, and I wouldn't be allowed to annihilate that intestine. The symphony said so. My read on the world dictated that I had already done too much. As soon as we had stepped away from the line to go on the offensive, I had stepped down an irreversible path that all but guaranteed Iron Legion's end. I could have maintained my hold. I could have stayed at the line, bolstered our defenses further, and simply sat there. That would have maintained my spot as Iron Legion's commander, and it would have kept the army together. I would simply do as I had always done. I could have bought myself more time. I could have continued to accumulate, to research, to improve my army even further beyond anything in this world. But then I would have been playing like the pawn they wanted me to. I would have simply moved with the orchestra, both demonic and angelic. I would have played the tune they demanded of me like a court jester appeasing his king. And the thought of doing so made me want to vomit. Now I was playing my own score, a violent song of bloody metal and acidic smoke. I was pissing off every major player on stage, and I was laughing every second that I ruined their harmonious music. But the consequences would come, they certainly would. When they did, I would lack the power to resist. Yet, perhaps that was the point. I had started Iron Legion, had disrupted the global powers with espionage, and continued to brew my plots all for the sake of change. I knew that the harmony had to be brutally slaughtered if I wanted humanity to survive. So I suppose all this had been for the sake of providing another set of notes to follow, another tempo to flow into. After Solipta was briefed and given my warnings, I allowed General Gaffney to start integrating them into our army. Across the course of 2 days, they were divided between all of the units and provided leaders, building a chain of command. While the need for one was loose right now, every unit still needed direction. Formations moved around, and units were divided. Some of the larger units split from the camp to continue their advance into enemy lines earlier than others, and with them moved their new flicker reinforcements. It was a good way of enforcing the divisions. All the while, the flickers had feasted on the corpses that filled the land. It became abundantly clear that they didn't like their food charred and minced together, but it was also free, so I heard nothing from Solipta. Then, after the divisions had been made, the army was ready to move once more. There was no more singular Scourge army to hunt down. The last battle had decimated the rest of them. Now, the Scourge was concentrated around their establishments, so those rightly became our new objectives. There were many nests, but not many cities. That meant we would divide Iron Legion across multiple fronts and hit the many hundreds of targets as we moved, one after the other. I had my eyes on one target, though. It would be the first stop that 1st Brigade made, the ruins of Stronghold Charlie. I intended to return to my old stomping grounds and recover what I had lost there. From there we would move toward the treehouse, and we would clear out the nexus they had established there. I would see many familiar faces and landmarks. It was a shame that I'd have to wipe off the map what hadn't already been. So, a few days after the flickers had come and our battle ended, we set off toward our objective. Alongside us, the other brigades steamrolled across the land to separate targets, some more toward the east, others near the coastline. As soon as we moved, I could hear the symphony shift. The world rippled with my actions, the final nail in the coffin being driven by my command. And we marched, in my sight the people I had once lost to forces I hadn't yet understood. He's finally moving. Polly sighed at her desk in the glass desert, far from the moving front line. On her screen was the all-command for deployment that John had given. She knew where his first target was. Stronghold Charlie had always been the gateway, the bulwark holding the most western portions of the front line together. He and the other brigades would have to pass it if they wanted to reach the northern Scourge cities and nests near the coast. In the back of her mind, she had always wondered if this day would ever come. She had been so focused on her job-running sector for that she hadn't the mind to pay attention to the war as a whole. She certainly couldn't see it like John did, but she trusted him, trusted that he would succeed. While she continued running Black Ops, raiding villages and towns, and unlocking secret vaults, he was fighting one of history's most cataclysmic battles. And he had won. It was an absolute victory by any standard other than his. Now they would push farther. She wasn't sure how she felt about her old stronghold being taken back. It would have to happen, but the knowledge that there was no more sentiment, there was something that broke her heart every time she thought about it. Everything had been ruined and destroyed. There was nothing left for them there. Nothing to be nostalgic about. Just memories of sorrow and hatred. She didn't lift her head to look, but she heard Jasmine crying after the all-comm went out. The two were silent in their office. Polly wouldn't let herself cry. Jasmine did enough of that for both of them. Polly. Yes. Polly looked up, seeing Jasmine breaking down more. I miss them. Faces flickered through Polly's mind with her words. Images she shoved down just as fast as they came. When she looked over, she spotted the emblem of the snow doves on Jasmine's desk. That beautiful white dove flying through a pure blue sky brought back memories she didn't want to let herself remember. She closed her eyes and turned away. I do too, she muttered, doing her best to hold together. Lately, she couldn't even find it in herself to be angry. Wrath was lost on her. It was things like this that only brought about sadness. Perhaps it was because she knew that John was taking on all of that madness for them. She didn't need to be angry. She just needed to support the people who were. She would trust that he would bring her the solace she needed. that he would find retribution for those they had lost. That was all she needed, and she would do her work to ensure he was taken care of in the dark. He's moving. About damn time. Anderson walked into the office with that announcement, startling Valdemar, who was hunched over some paperwork. What? Why are you here? I was bringing you a much-needed intelligence update. John Cooper has launched his assault. No need to thank me. What about the battle he was fighting? There were millions of Scourge. All handled. He killed every last one of them, including the Sovereign, and is now moving on the offensive. Valdemar went silent for several moments, staring as Anderson kicked his feet up onto his desk. It was Ironheart. Take you that long to figure it out? I'm not Authority 12, if you haven't noticed. Anyway, he's going on the offensive. What's his target? Everything, probably. It's impossible for him to attack everything. He could never sustain that, at least not while moving faster than the Scourge can muster resistance. Valdemar pondered the implications of an all-out offensive. Iron Legion would get far, but they couldn't go all the way. They would likely hit the battlefields the Templars currently held in control before meeting enough resistance to be stopped. The Scourge would keep sending more troops, not to mention the corrupted standing in the way. It wasn't a matter of firepower either. Iron Legion simply didn't have the logistics. Their planes were abundant, but even the line had required dedicated train lines to supply the entire front. Now that they were leaving the comfort of their supply lines, they would be on a clock. They would run out of food and ordnance before long, knowing their expenditures. Or so Valdemar thought, until Anderson barked a laugh. Don't you worry, General. I don't have the capacity to explain it at the moment, so all you need to know is that he can, in fact, sustain it. You should ponder under the premise that his ordnance and supplies are infinite, and that logistics are a non-factor. That's also impossible. War itself is about logistics. I could understand if you said his resources are infinite. They certainly seem like it. But an offensive from where he stands is a logistical nightmare, no matter what kind of technology he devised. Now that's just a lack of creativity on your part, you old dog. Look, I don't care how you need to rationalize it. Just know that Iron Legion won't stop because they ran out of food or ordnance. That's all I got for you. Anderson said that before walking out, leaving Valdemar to stew in doubt. If what he said was true, then Iron Legion could reach the land bridge. The line and anything surrounding the glass desert had continued to be under an information lockdown, so the Order still knew next to nothing about the technology they hid. And despite their best efforts trying to dig into Son Industries, they still didn't know how John was managing to roll out the tech he did. It would take an entire organization just to do the research and development, let alone the production. It was impossible that John was doing even just the research side all by himself. He had people, lots of very, very smart people backed by a colossal amount of resources. And yet they couldn't find even a hint of this secret organization, despite making themselves fairly infamous in the last year. Entire towns and villages being razed to the ground, along with hundreds of thousands of massacred Nephilim, had not gone unnoticed by the Order. Every intelligence community knew about what was happening, even though they didn't know who was carrying it out. That never stopped John's name from appearing in their minds, though. There was no doubt he was making moves of his own in the dark. They just couldn't figure out how he would have developed such a powerful organization, completely unseen and unknown, wielding technology they couldn't fathom. Nobody wanted to believe he was the one who had done it, but given his building achievements, it soon may not even matter. Valdemar knew the kingdom would make its move on Iron Legion soon. This new offensive all but confirmed it would happen. Question was, how much damage would John do before they brought him down? If he really was so capable, and if he really was going to roll those tanks all the way to the land bridge, then he needed to make preparations of his own. The battle lines would shift massively. He may even have to cooperate with the man. That was not a thought he stomached easily. He had only met John once, but he had seen enough, even on his wedding day, to guess at the kind of man he was. And he was self-aware enough to know that they would not mesh well. Still, the results were what mattered. Valdemar pushed aside his paperwork, scheduling a meeting with the Pope and beginning to draft battle plans. The Templars would have to follow suit. Whether Iron Legion fell because of their hubris in the end was secondary to being able to secure the land bridge. Chapter 314, Song of Desolation. May 6, 629. General Gaffney didn't have to give me the report. He had stopped doing so a while ago, knowing that there was little that could escape my knowledge, especially something so obvious. Stronghold Charlie was on approach. We had decimated several small armies of Scourge in our way, ultimately finding ourselves on the treacherous path toward the stronghold ruins. The stronghold had been difficult to attack precisely because of its location, which meant that moving super heavy tanks and hundreds of other armored vehicles along roads not meant for them was a tall task. Most ended up staying behind as terraforming measures took place, widening roads, carving out new ones, and building a path that would allow us to access the north. It would take some time, but it was through that path that we would gain access to what had originally been long-established Scourge territory that hadn't been intruded upon for many decades. Warlocks and summoners were already figuring out how to tackle the task of building a bridge across Hare's Pass, that nostalgic ravine that used to be the source of so many missions for the Pathfinders. Now nothing more than biomat-covered dirt and poisoned water. The place was a total wasteland. Even the Black Forest, that magical, beautiful canopy of lights and harmonious ecology, was completely razed, no sign that it was ever there according to aerial scans. Despite difficulties, we managed to get several super heavy tanks through towards Stronghold Charlie, as well as several armored transports full of our more specialized fighters. I had a marshal with me as well, just in case they had another Authority 11 Royal on their side that needed to get taken care of. I glanced at a screen in the HUD of my exosuit. The local scans from jets above were showing a sizable force of a few tens of thousands of Scourge. The main concern, though, was the fact that many of them weren't monsters. We were finally encountering armies of corrupted humans, mutated almost beyond recognition. I had been expecting to encounter them sooner or later. The fall of the treehouse had left the Scourge with many prisoners and victims. There were plenty that had come nowhere close to escaping. My retreat wave, which had to fight tooth and nail just to breach the encirclement and still lost just about everybody, had been one of the first to leave. The vast majority of the treehouse's forces hadn't been ordered to retreat at all, left to fend for themselves and attempt to escape only after they realized that they had been left for dead. Now, we were encountering some of those forces. I spotted my gunships in the air, already aiming at the concentration of monsters. As we crested some hills, we finally laid eyes on the ruins. The stronghold was just about entirely leveled, buildings replaced with towering organic constructs. Massive bloody veins extended from the tower of flesh in the center, extending into the biomat below and making it thicker than it had any right to be. Spore spewers filled the air with caustic gases, making it just as poisonous as everything else around here. It was a good thing that our armors and vehicles were environmentally sealed. As soon as we were within line of sight, we garnered a reaction from the Scourge forces around the place. Corrupted and an army of monsters started turning toward us under the beckon of their scouts. I sent a signal to our birds in the sky, and as we moved into position for battle, they started chucking shells. Explosions dotted the army. The tanks around me went to rapid fire, our air support dropping bombs that uprooted the fleshly constructs. Mages found places to stand where they could cast their spells. The army started running toward us, but they had already been softened up. The marshal suddenly appeared by my side. He looked toward me. I returned the gaze. Marshal Ryan Bulund was an Authority 11 warlock whom Ironheart had recommended. He had always been moving with the brigades before the line had been established, always fighting, always eradicating every army he came across. Specializing in wide area spells, he was a walking disaster, only lesser than the Sovereign Ironheart had killed not long ago. He didn't look like much either. He was over a foot shorter than I was and was generally muted with his emotions. Sector 4 had reported a whole lot of nothing on him. He had no outstanding quirks, triggers, or attributes. He was so normal and plain that it was suspicious in itself. That was until they investigated his private residence and found that he really loved sculpting. I could vividly recall the pictures and footage of entire rooms filled with thousands of ice and stone sculptures, including one of a nude woman that he kept in his bed. Turns out he was quite the expressive man, and maybe glaringly autistic if the detail in his sculptures was anything to go by. I nodded to him. Marshal Bulund. I sensed nothing greater than Authority 10. Should I step in? He asked, turning his gaze toward the incoming army. I hummed in response. If you didn't mind saving me some money. He smirked a bit, then stepped forward while raising his foci. Even through my exosuit, I could feel the temperature drop. It was always cold this far north, but after he started casting his spell, I could see little snowflakes form from the freezing moisture in the atmosphere. After that, his hybrid magic launched itself toward the army. Water and earth magic intertwined, and Flash froze only moments before hitting the enemy, creating a wave of sharp ice crystals that shredded through everything it came across. Corrupted and monsters were skewered before their wounds froze over with permafrost. The weaker ones weren't even graced with spikes. They were simply frozen, encased in ice that completely halted all life. Before I knew it, the entire army had been turned into a sea of bleeding ice. Only the most powerful could survive the wave, and those were swiftly taken care of as our brigadiers moved in to finish them off. General Gaffney gave the order to move, and the tanks started rolling forward. Monsters turned into ice sculptures were run over and crushed, reduced to shattered crystals. Anything else, Marshal Bulund melted down, making sure our vehicles didn't have terrain issues. Tens of thousands of monsters and corrupted, rendered completely helpless before the might of a marshal. It pissed me off every time I saw it. Bulund didn't exert himself that hard either. He could do that dozens of times over, killing hundreds of thousands by himself before getting tired. Then it would just take a period of rest before he could do it again. I couldn't imagine how many lives could have been saved by the kingdom if their marshals got off their sorry asses and did the same. They treated marshals and sovereigns like a nuclear option, never to be used at the expense of so many thousands of lives. And that was exactly why I was so disruptive to the symphony. I simply didn't give a damn and used the weapons at my disposal. We rolled forward, killing off anything that was lucky enough to survive. Then we finally rolled onto the old grounds of Stronghold Charlie. It was nearly unrecognizable, not that the salvo of bombs helped. I still saw how the structures morphed to the natural formation of the hill, but otherwise, nothing remained of what once was. I felt Amara approach as I stared at the location of where the Pathfinder barracks used to be. Now in its place were the charred remnants of some spore spewers. I sighed, letting the memories pass through me. I could see the entire base from where I was, barely distinguishable from reality. And as much as I wanted to feel nostalgic about where I was, there was nothing here in this place that could feed it. Not even the same air. Everything had been poisoned. Are you all right? Amara's voice reached my ears despite the humming treads of tanks. Her large witch hat filtered the air from anything that would seek to dirty her body or lungs. I'm fine. We'll spend some time here at the stronghold, help coordinate the terraforming. Once we can get that bridge across Hare's Pass built, we'll make our move toward the treehouse. Sounds like as good a plan as ever. Well, they've got a whole host of corrupted. We may not need artillery, but we'll still need to prepare. That army has some intelligence on top of their numbers. I explained while going through what intel we had. The treehouse had been turned into a corruption site only days after it fell. It had been years since then, and it had acted as a springboard for those millions of monsters that sieged the line during the Battle of Heaven's Fire. It had been turned into a nexus, a site of sustenance and transportation for those gargantuan intestines. It was the point at which the intestine which supplied reinforcements against the line started. While moving, we had been cutting into the intestine, severing its connection and blowing it to bits. It would die off before long, but we still had to take out the roots. That nexus would be the first main root that we pulled out and burned to cinders. We had plans to soften them up as well. If we still only had propeller planes, then it would be too risky, but with our new lines of jet aircraft, we could operate in the skies uncontested. Whether it was missile strikes or bombing runs, for as much time as it took to establish a proper bridge across the pass, we would be firebombing that nexus. Even if they decided to send troops to attack us in retaliation, there was a day of travel between us and them. Anything they sent would be decimated before it could reach us, not to mention the defenses we could mount. In time, we would also have artillery operational. Even if they sent everything they had, their most intelligent option, we would be entrenched. Stronghold Charlie had been placed where it was because of its advantageous position. The Scourge would have no chance against us. Camp was quickly set up after we arrived. Warlocks and summoners started to raise the local terrain to make the place livable, removing the biomat and expelling atmospheric contaminants while setting up shielding around the area. Supplies were dropped and moved vehicles started moving in. I made sure everyone knew their jobs, which meant delegating primary tasks to my generals. Once that was finished, though, they needed nothing more than general oversight to correct any mistakes or deficiencies, if there were any. That meant I had plenty of free time, which I put to good use. I was still refining my own personal technology. After plenty of time taking over the citadel at the island of continuance, more old tech had been found and sent over. I analyzed as much as I could, learnt anything I could dissect from the mantle's advanced psychic and computational devices. The Wonderland facility on the island did the same. Years later, they were still primarily studying the anomaly. As important as it was, all information was strictly confined to that island. The main teams on the mainland knew nothing about the place, let alone what was being studied. Plenty of progress had been made regarding both the anomaly as well as the automatons. I used everything they gave and refined it myself. While the core automaton technology still continued to elude me, even superficial comprehensions were revealing things about the nature of Psyche that I would never have found otherwise. All of it helped toward my advancement, even if I wasn't studying my advancement formations. The thing about summoners was that they were thinkers. They could advance without combat. In fact, such was the norm for all summoners. Even I had limited gains from battle. It primarily helped me in the act of draining my psyche, which stressed my regeneration and thereby filled my mind with psyche. Oftentimes I would regenerate while sleeping, and I would dream about my psychic comprehensions. However, there were other ways to achieve the same effect without a hint of combat or danger. Combat had always been something I engaged in because I wanted to, not because I had to. It did more for me by simply keeping me sharp and motivated. There was nothing about shooting guns packed with psyche that helped me with my comprehensions about the nature of the world. So while I simply sat back in my tents or workshops and studied, I was making breakneck progress toward Authority 9. Every new device and piece of tech I built, every new enchantment I designed, every new comprehension I discovered helped me toward that next realm. I already knew that it wouldn't be much longer until it arrived. The advancement formations themselves had almost been completed in my mind. After that, it was just a matter of cultivating the power. I just hoped that I would be fast enough. I wanted to acquire what was in my 9th star before the Song of Desolation befell my Iron Legion. Chapter 315, Insanity of the Great Barrier. May 16th, 625. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Amara smirked as she heard John's voice chime through the comm channel with artificial sultry smoothness. Stealth systems were cranked up so high around them that she could barely see the walls of the vehicle they were driving in, sounds of battle ringing outside. I'd like to welcome everyone aboard the Chameleon Model B. We are currently operating at an altitude of 7,400 feet above sea level with speeds sitting at about 40 miles per hour. The time is an hour past noon, with light winds of about 15 miles per hour, smoggy skies, and cool weather with a high of 22 degrees. As we make our approach, I would just like to remind everyone to keep their hands, feet, and objects within the interior of the vehicle at all times. In the event of a catastrophic upset during our ride, there are emergency exits located to the rear, front, and top of the vehicle. If there are no unexpected incidents during our travel, we can expect an ETA of about 15 minutes. I will check in once more toward the tail end of our trip, so until then just sit back, relax, and enjoy the mostly smooth ride afforded by bleeding-edge suspension technology. Thank you. Amara chuckled and clapped a bit, the others around her smirking, helmets in their laps. Blackblood scoffed. Mostly smooth, he says. Right after his words, the entire vehicle violently jolted after hitting a divot in the ground, throwing everyone into the air for a short split second. It was not the first time it happened, and Blackblood grunted after knocking his head against the roof. The ride progressed swiftly, everyone chattering for a while before John suddenly announced again. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. There's been a small hiccup, and I felt it necessary to inform everyone aboard the vessel that we will be ending our trip inside a wall. What do you mean, inside a wall? I mean inside a wall. In about 3 seconds. Everyone suddenly felt the vehicle hit something and launch into the air. Hands locked around handles before they slammed into the aforementioned wall. Everything was silent for a second before their comm systems clicked again, and we have landed. I'd like to thank everyone for riding with Cooper Transportation Services. Please remain seated while the vehicle dislodges from the wall. There was another jolt, and they all fell through the air before slamming into the ground. You may now remove your seatbelts. I didn't have mine on. Sounds like a personal problem. Blackblood grunted as he untwisted himself, everyone climbing out of the car through the various hatches. Miraculously, they were still upright. After stepping out, Amara spotted the hole in the wall that they had created. Funnily enough, though, their active camo systems were still working perfectly well. None of the nearby monsters had spotted them. She turned as John exited. He was wearing another exosuit, what he called the specialist configuration, Infiltrator. It was sleek, with ghillie fabrics hanging from the suit and muted colors that flickered with invisibility systems. Combined with his normal stealth abilities, it was impossible to find him when he didn't want to be. He kept himself in view of the team, though. Despite all the monsters around them being oblivious to their presence, they could detect each other just fine. Let's move. John raised a rifle that blended with his suit, a thick integrated silencer peeking from the end of the weapon. The rest of the Desert Eagles fell in behind him. They maintained vigilance as they ran toward the heart of the nexus. It was a massive building of metal and calcified materials. Near it, the gargantuan intestine was sticking out, troops running in and out of it to do battle with Iron Legion forces beyond the walls. The siege had been initiated after over a week of constant firebombing. The once dense concentration of monsters and corrupted soldiers had been whittled down to a fraction of the original number. Now it was just a cleanup of the remaining forces. What they were doing required a bit more finesse, though. Nobody knew what was inside a nexus site, and John had decided to infiltrate this one and find out. The enemy Authority 11 Royal that had been stationed here had already left to do battle with Iron Legion's marshals. While other Authority 10s had been detected inside, the Desert Eagles could handle any that came their way. If they were noticed at all, they would get in, scour the place for anything interesting, and leave them a present on the way out. They strode across the fleshy grounds, bypassing every monster and worker beast in the area. Gunships were slinging shells at anything that obviously stood out from above, and parts of the walls were being blasted inward as the super heavy tanks closed the distance. Thankfully, orders were given not to fire on the main building and bring it down. They wouldn't be buried with it. They were silent as they walked into one of the entrances to the building. They had to be careful not to hit any of the monsters making their way through. Giving a signal, Aki was ordered to bring her team up the tower. There were large stairways that led to different levels, which they quickly split off into. John led them down another direction, finding some hidden pathways that led underground. Other teams had already used various devices to map out the structure. One of them was a pulse scanner that could be fired from a tank cannon. After making contact with the building, it would use powerful bursts of mana to map out everything around it before beaming the information back and detonating itself. They weren't exactly subtle, but it wasn't like the Scourge would have any idea what those waves of mana were doing, especially when they were busy being firebombed hour after hour. They knew where they had to go, so they found the paths and traveled down them. Along the way, they encountered several royals of various power levels, the intelligence behind the Scourge. They refrained from killing any as they made their way to the first set of rooms. After going through a few sets of doors, they found themselves amidst living areas with both royals and corrupted. Amara knew that all of the Desert Eagles were recording everything they encountered using cameras on their suits, including John, so they sifted through some more private areas before moving on. They continued deeper, finding nothing of interest. Storage areas, more living areas, and processing facilities were all they found. The facilities were processing things like food or other war material, but since they were almost completely biological, there was little they could do to study them besides taking samples. It was only at the deepest levels that they found the things they were looking for. They stepped down the last stairway that previous scans showed. It led to the deepest portions of the nexus. Apparently, at the end of it, they would be finding a massive shielded room. They weren't sure what was inside of it, but that was why they were investigating. John put up his hand right before they turned a corner. He took a step back, then waited. Amara could sense a royal approaching. It was easily Authority 9, but it didn't seem like it was a king blood. John raised his rifle, and when the royal turned the corner, its head was right in front of the muzzle. Its skull was greeted with a bullet, which punched a clean hole into the brain, stopping inside. It was given just enough power that the bullet didn't exit and embed itself into the opposing wall. After the corpse fell, John stepped past it. Fighting came in behind him, retrieving the corpse into a spatial storage while Jaya followed up by incinerating the blood and residual fluids. They continued on, finding one last pair of doors. John dropped next to it while everyone surrounded him, auras primed. He took out his seer knife, stabbing it into the doors, and watching the enchantments across them light up with power. Psyche flooded through the knife, while the corruptive power of the neural gem flooded the enchantments, rendering them inert and bringing them under John's control. With a few more moments, only after every connected system had been usurped, John placed a scanner on the doors, which pulsed with barely discernible mana. It gave everyone a view of the room beyond. They could see all of the bodies within, humanoids that rushed around the place with urgency, naturally because of the ongoing raid outside. It seemed they were setting up a formation around the room, filling the walls and floor, as well as auxiliary structures. More importantly, though, was the massive object in the center. It was a beating heart pumping with active poisonous mana. Amara guessed that it was at least 200 feet tall and nearly just as wide. While the mana wasn't absurdly powerful, there was a seemingly endless amount of it being pushed through. Only now was it able to be felt after John took control of the enchantments, which brought down the shielding. Amara was able to sift through the ocean of mana, though, feeling the faint spatial fluctuations radiating from the formations. She spoke over comms. They're setting up a teleporter, probably to transport the heart out. Looks like it. Get ready to raid the place. We need to kill them fast, preserve any intel. Don't let them destroy anything. I'll prepare my spell. Amara started casting after John nodded, a dense ball of spatial energy forming between her hands. The others prepared themselves as well, their HUDs blinking with tags as John assigned them targets. There were 2 Authority 10 targets, but neither of them were King Bloods. It seemed those were outside fighting, buying time so that the formation could be completed. We have those brigadiers. Quan spoke for him and Song, John nodding to them. Ready. Amara signaled after a minute or so, John dropping an illusion device by the door. It would mask their entry, none of the royals within knowing that the door was opening. Then, he pressed, cracking open the door and letting everyone slip through. Once they were all inside, John raised his rifle, aiming at his target. His word came, "Mark." His shot fired, killing outright another Authority 9 royal. Then Amara's spell released a split second later. Every minor enemy through the room was eviscerated as spatial fissures opened up near their bodies, tearing them to shreds. The others lunged at their targets, Quan and Song flying toward the 2 Authority 10s and pinning them down. They were brutal with their charged attacks, both enemies mortally wounded with the surprise. Only a few seconds later, they were decapitated, corpses falling to the floor. Everyone gathered in the center, not a single humanoid alive in the room. John quickly moved to start taking control of what looked like more systems. While they were partially biological, they were still enchanted and they still contained data. In fact, the neural gem was more suited toward biological intrusion anyway, given that it too had come from a biological creature. Amara looked over at Song and Quan. That was awfully fast. I thought they would at least put up a fight. We're much better at surprise attacks. It was our primary mode of battle for many decades before we escaped the ruined mantle of wisdom. You could never stick around to fight for long when there were powerful enemies everywhere you went. True. She nodded with impression. It wasn't every day that the twins got to go all out and fight in their element. She was impressed every time she saw them work. They were always in perfect sync, capable of explosive power that she hadn't seen from any other knight. Even Phaidon was attempting to learn from them, considering his attacks had unparalleled explosive potential with his speed. Before long, John had collected the data he needed. Amara went to his side as he took control of all the room's enchantments. So, what did you find? This heart is a conduit. Every nexus has one, and from them grows the biomat that we know and love. They also feed the spore nests. Putting it plainly, this heart is the center of the Scourge's terraforming efforts. They corrupt the land ceaselessly. Even the intestines are built toward that end. So we kill these hearts and reclaim the land. Yes, though I doubt there's much to reclaim farther north. Still, if we don't destroy these, the land will continue to be poisoned. If we do, though, we can push back their territory. Sounds like what we need to do is pretty straightforward then. John nodded, going silent for a bit longer before tampering with the seer knife. It's odd, though. Alongside the heart, there's an intelligence. It's small, infantile, but it's there. Is it doing anything? Not since I took everything from it. Chances are that it's meant to be significantly stronger than it is now, but it didn't have time to grow since this nexus is relatively new. We'll need to be careful with the next nexus we go to. Any intelligence from these monsters isn't a good thing. There was a flash from the knife, the entire heart clenching with a burst of mana. Then, John motioned to her. Mind cutting that down? I want to bring it in. I also want to see if Pup can eat it. Maybe it'll be nourishing to him, since flickers feed on the scourge. Sure. Amara nodded before launching blades of air and space toward the veins and arteries that the heart was suspended from. The entire thing fell to the ground once she was done, mana so dense that it looked like a liquid spilling out from the wounds. It filled the room like a lake, Amara scrunching her nose. If it was normal Majika, then it would have been fine, heavenly even. But this Majika was deathly, filled with venomous vitality. Eventually, the heart started to ooze actual blood. It looked oily and black as the heart deflated. Still, Amara brought out Pup. The large wolf, which had grown to be just as tall as Amara was on all fours, turned to the heart with salivating fangs. He looked back at Amara, excitement in his eyes. She chuckled. I'm certainly not eating it. Go on. She waved, and Pup dove in, chomping down on the massive heart and tearing a huge chunk from it. Amara heard a chuckle from John. He went up to it and carved out some samples, sending them away before setting up the explosives. Pup ate through the heart like his stomach had no bottom. His body purified the scourge's influence from his food. Even the oily blood would be vaporized from his coat if it splashed onto it. In record time, half the heart disappeared, and it was only then that Pup seemed to have enough. With a bulging stomach, Pup trotted back to Amara, nudging his large head against her and asking for pets. All right, go on back so we can get out of here. You need time to digest anyway. Pup gave a bark before disappearing into Amara's soul. John sent the rest of the heart into another spatial storage, and then they all moved to leave the nexus. They headed all the way back up so they could meet with the others. Along the way, they planted more explosives, ensuring every structural support would collapse. When they got back outside, they could see Iron Legion annihilating everything in their path, descending upon the nexus. Not wanting to be in their way for much longer, the team retreated to their stealth vehicle, the Chameleon, and started driving away. John gave the signal after they made some distance. I'm clear. Take that thing down. Roger. Missiles away. They got a response, and a pair of jets made their approach overhead. From them lit streaks of fire, a cluster of missiles heading straight for the nexus. John hit his detonator right as they made impact. From above and below, explosives went off and turned the nexus into a massive pillar of violent fire that could be seen for a dozen miles around. No longer inhibited, gunships and tanks went to full force, lighting up everything around the nexus. Blackblood stuck his head out the top hatch of the car, chuckling as the others did the same through the windows. Well, ain't that something? Just the first of many. They drove away as what used to be the treehouse was purified by righteous flame. All the remaining corrupted, those who had once been soldiers for the base, were swept up like every other structure. Amara glanced at John, sensing nothing from him. Once upon a time, he had been responsible for making the treehouse into what it became, reinforced by hundreds of thousands, and later becoming a graveyard of corruption as a result of its fall. Now, they had finally retaken it. They had made up for the sins of the past through brutal, mechanized warfare. And it was only the start. Amara knew John wouldn't stop until he was forced to buy powers he couldn't resist. She just hoped that this campaign wouldn't hit him too hard by the end of it. She hoped that he wouldn't be driven further into the insanity of the Great Barrier than he had already been. Chapter 316, Dead Silent. July 1st, 629. Amara glanced to the side at John as he walked straight to the access terminal. The royals around him were oblivious to their presence. It was only Team 1 inside this nexus today. After tackling the first few together, they figured that there was no need for the entire Desert Eagles group to handle every single one. They could split the two teams. Currently Team 2, with Aki in the lead, was handling another nexus a few hundred miles away. When John killed the few royals in his way at the terminal, the others moved. Phaidon decapitated several with a swing of his spear while Amara let her spell release. There was an authority 10 and it wasn't a king blood, so Quan and Song were able to handle it themselves. Still, she couldn't get every last royal without exerting herself more than necessary. She let the others handle their targets, and Pup simultaneously jumped out of her soul. His snow-white fur with icy blue accents sparked with lightning and spatial cracks, shooting across the room like he was teleporting and ripping apart the royals near him with his sharp teeth. Amara smiled at her familiar. She didn't often let the flicker out to play because her fights had often been too dangerous. For the several years after she got him, he had spent the majority of the time constantly catching up to her strength. He fed off her power, but she had grown so fast, and the enemies she fought were so dangerous that he rarely got the opportunity to join her on equal grounds. That had changed in the last year, however. The flicker had gotten bigger, stronger, and faster. His body was packed so full of mana that it sprinkled off his fur like snowflakes, filling the ambient atmosphere with a domain of power. Simply being near the flicker was oppressing for the Scourge. More than that, Pup had learned from Amara's magic. Flickers didn't learn magic the same way humans did. They didn't learn spells, but they did garner comprehensions about the elements. More importantly, they could pull from 2 of the 3 energies of Magicka. Pup had always been a vigor mana hybrid, with a strong body and equally strong magic. Since he had been with Amara, a warlock, for so long his body actually fell behind his magic. Amara could see her comprehensions of space, air, and even fire coursing through Pup's manipulations of mana. In time, he would learn to utilize more extreme levels of magic, especially as it pertained to space. Still, even right now, the large wolf with wings had used a technique similar to Fiden's own auric technique of spatial bending for unrivaled speed. She also knew that he was trying to learn to fly. With more time outside during Iron Legion's campaign, especially while being among his own kind, he had been honing his air magic to put those wings to good use. He had already tried getting Amara on his back to take her soaring through the clouds with the Owly Cats, which ended with several crash landings. Things like those were a work in progress, but it was undeniable now that Pup had finally begun to acquire enough combat prowess to join her in these more dangerous battles. The wolf could rip apart Authority 9 royals like the hearty meals they were, and as he killed and ate more, he brought his vigor and strength up to standard. The Nexus hearts they had been harvesting had been a more potent meal than anything else could be. Truly, flickers were the antithesis of the Scourge, entities born for the sole purpose of balancing the power dynamic. It was a shame that there were so few of them now. The room was cleared out without ceremony, and within seconds, John had taken control of the room's enchantments. Barriers were deactivated, and unlike last time, these royals hadn't scrambled to teleport the heart away. Iron Legion's brigades had yet to start sieging the place. With a signal from John, that quickly changed. They felt the Nexus rock as missiles made impact. Jaya and Blackblood went to the entrance to guard it, the others hanging around and getting the heart ready to harvest. Amara leaned against a console next to John, watching his seer knife flicker with corruptive power. She still felt shivers whenever she glanced at that neural gem. There was no more potent concentration of sadism or malice in the world. It was an orb designed for the sole purpose of sprouting the Scourge's most feared entity. Corruption was a greater mercy than being hooked to a death shrine. John's psyche pulsed with complexity she couldn't begin to understand, and then he ripped the knife out, sheathing it and looking up at the heart still beating with potent mana and vigor, still hanging from the ceiling. Jackpot! You found one. Amara's brows raised slightly. They had raided several a Nexus by now, and at every one, John had been searching for a more developed intelligence. These hearts were operated by and attached to a neural network. The first one they found had been an undeveloped one, bare bones, and being generally unsubstantial. Most of them were like this, but apparently, this one was different. John nodded to her. Yeah, this one is actually connected to something beyond this Nexus. Their network is beyond this terminal, though. I need the source. He said that before crouching down a bit. Amara stared as he launched himself up with explosive power, reaching the heart and grabbing an artery. He pulled himself on top of it before looking up. Amara used some magic to let herself float up toward him. Then, with an illusion, John created a circle on the ceiling. Can you cut through here? Sure. She created a fire spell, a concentrated torch appearing above her pointed fingers. Then she went around, cutting where John designated. Once all the way through, the cut portion of the ceiling fell, revealing a large mass of brain and tissue. Amara cringed at how nasty it looked. Nice, John muttered, raising his hand to the wrinkly brain. Then, from his fingers shot out thin connections of visible light blue psyche. They embedded themselves into the brain, and from them sprinkled out shifting runes and arrays that slowly covered the entire brain. "Show me where you lead." Amara glanced at him as he worked, unable to see his face through his hyper-advanced helmet. After the arrays covered the whole brain, they started blinking with power. The area near John's hand bloomed into a structure, looking like a port or a sheath. John took out his seer knife and slowly pushed it into the sheath, the previously blue Psyche turning purple as its computational power spread. The arrays and comprehensible runes warped into esoteric forms, becoming more violent than subtle. Some parts of the brain were seared due to the sheer influx of power, yet still, John's power only drove deeper. All was going well, until it wasn't. "Oh!" Amara heard John suddenly mutter, her stomach dropping. Right after, a nearby portion of the ceiling exploded out with blood, revealing a writhing mass of more neural tissue. Except it was pulsing with greenish-red activity. Amara could feel the wrath behind that power, its intentions hardly contained compared to John's. She asked worriedly, "What's happening?" "Something noticed me." "What kind of something?" "A much more powerful nexus, and the entity overseeing it. I don't recognize what exactly it is." Amara tried to let out a sigh, but she wasn't relaxed enough to do that. She felt the horrible intellectual power of that poisonous red energy fill the room, putting her on edge. It slowly encroached on what territory John had taken. It was a battle Amara couldn't comprehend, but it was easy to see that John wasn't winning. She could feel it from his body language. He wasn't very happy. Regardless of what he wanted, though, he was driven out faster with every bit the enemy took. Then he suddenly ripped out his seer knife, his arrays exploding alongside the entire brain. A massive amount of blood and neural fluids ruptured from the organ, pouring down on top of them. Thankfully, Amara could cover herself with a shield, but John wasn't so lucky, his suit being drenched. He eventually sighed as the enemy withdrew with mocking tones of Psyche. "Well, that didn't go as planned. You think. But it wasn't without its fruits. Turns out there's a whole chain of nexus brains. Disgustingly powerful ones, too." "So it seems." The two jumped to the ground, Amara burning off all the crap on John's suit, turning him into a human torch for a minute. She asked her question after Fiden chopped down the heart, allowing them to stow it and start leaving. "So what does this mean for us moving forward?" "Nothing different. We might have to face something with powerful psychic abilities, but until then we just need to keep bringing down every nexus we find. We'll sweep across the continent like we already are, and each one we kill means one less brain in the chain for that entity to wield." "All right, but what do those brains even do?" "Hard to say. I didn't pull many decipherable memories, but chances are it's an intelligence network and communication array at the minimum, responsible for command and control. I was able to get a glimpse of the entire network. Unfortunately, that didn't give me locations, but I at least know numbers, so I'll know if we miss any. Only downside is that they know we know. We likely won't be harvesting any more hearts after today." Amara sighed, but at the least, she figured it really didn't matter. They would be destroying every nexus they came across anyway, while the Scourge would be able to retain these strategic structures like the hearts or brains. That didn't change the fact that they'd be driven out. She wasn't sure how valuable they were, but ultimately, so long as they weren't on the continent at the end of all this, their value was inconsequential. John still looked concerned, though. When she saw him refusing to start leaving with the rest of them, she stopped and frowned. "John, you okay?" "You know, I always thought that the Scourge would have monsters specializing in psychic magic. Unholy Light used it as a supplement to its battle style, and Despair is supposed to be the primary psychic threat. But there's no reason they wouldn't have monsters like Shrikes. I always wondered why we hadn't encountered one, though. You'd think they'd sprinkle some through their forces." Amara remained silent, staring at him with confusion written across her face, until a rifle appeared in his hands, causing her mana to flare on instinct. She sought out any possible threats nearby, and she wasn't the only one. The others saw him and went on high alert, auras pervading the entire room like they were all fighting each other to discover the threat first. Amara focused on her mind, though. John's instincts were almost never wrong. It was just unfortunate that his warnings had gotten a little less direct since he started hearing the metaphysical music. John stepped around the place, psychic runes fluttering around his arms. He went blurry in her vision, speaking to how much power he was dumping into his illusion magic even though he was exempting them from its effects. Then he froze, his rifle snapping to the ceiling where the destroyed brain was, firing a single shot. Like something invisible fell from the ceiling, his barrel traced downward to the floor, his steps starting to circle something they couldn't see. Amara wanted to torch the entire area, but held back. She trusted his judgment. If he wasn't asking for help, that usually meant he had it under control. Despite that, she still felt his presence in her head. He was guarding them, just in case. Then he spoke. No, no. Don't look at them. Otherwise, I'll just end you here. His words made Amara tense. His rifle still trained on something in the center of the room. That's right. Don't think I can't sense it. I'm your enemy here. So drop the field and face me directly. You fat fucking maggot. His curses seemed to work, because a second later, the enemy revealed itself with a flash of Psyche. It really was a fat fucking maggot. Amara cringed at the disgusting parasite in front of her, a legless, carapaced bug 2 feet tall, just as wide, and 6 feet long. Its head chittered with burrowing fangs and sharp extendable teeth that writhed with unconcealed wrath. After revealing itself, she was finally able to sense the disgustingly potent Psyche it contained within its body, and all of it was bristling with intelligent anger and madness. It obviously posed no physical threat to them. It didn't even have limbs, and based on its movements, it could move about as fast as its form suggested. But Amara knew that when power lacked in one area, it was usually present in another. Poisonous Psyche filled the room, making Amara nauseous just from being in the vicinity. Its power seeped through her barrier despite her best efforts. Psyche was always tricky to deal with, mainly because she never had to. John was one of the only threatening users of Psyche on the entire continent. She made a mental note to work on this deficiency of hers. If there were more monsters like this hiding around, she'd need to be able to protect her mind without John there. For now, she decided to alleviate the pressure with some enchantments devised by him for that purpose. The nausea went away, the Psyche driven out, protecting her from even John's influence. You want to answer some of my questions? Or would you rather I put you through a mental blender? Bullets tend to be a bit more merciful, I'll have you know. The maggot responded to John's words with screeches and sparks of Psyche. A violent response, but not an attack, and nothing Amara was able to understand. However they were communicating, it was with a method she couldn't make sense of. The pulses and waves of Psyche they exchanged with their verbal sounds held much more than auditory information. They were more like exchanges of intention and context, a language that surpassed words or vocabulary. Is that right? And that thing I talked to, what was it? More screeches were his response, Amara getting glimpses of what the maggot was talking about. She picked up on faint images of a grand being, untouchable and godlike, nigh omniscient. They were grand interpretations, but Amara knew that the maggot was likely exaggerating. It could only speak about things as it understood them. John would know that as well. Either way, it was clear that whatever John had spoken with was incredibly powerful, a dedicated entity managing the entire network of nexuses and their cerebral components. It wasn't to be taken lightly, and it was definitely pissed off after John's intrusion. Amara could understand. Anything that involved John's seer knife wasn't likely to be pretty. It could kill by frying a being's nervous system, probably one of the worst ways to go, and Amara knew that John had already gone through more than a few generations of improvements over the last year. She'd be pissed off too if he stabbed her with that. The maggot was particularly angry as well. Whether it was because John heard it with his intrusion or because he had disrespected the grand being it served, she didn't know. He continued asking it questions, and he continued getting shrieks in response. The Psyche exchange between them made Wamra's head hurt when she tried to understand it, so she shut it out and kept her guard up, sending the others to guard their exit. She couldn't know if the maggot had alerted some royals, even though John would have likely caught something like that. Then, after another couple minutes, it seemed John's diplomacy broke down. The maggot suddenly flared with dark psychic arrays, Psyche pouring through the entire room. Amara felt her enchantments cranked to full power, and even then, she felt venomous tendrils slither through and try to prod at her brain. It was trying to burrow into her memories, and it took everything in her power not to tear the space around the maggot in half on reflex. The entire room was filled with dense arrays, but just as fast as they bloomed, they were smothered and snuffed out. John's own magic reached out and shattered all manner of formations the maggot created, clamping down on its power before engaging it in a battle of pure mental prowess. They simply stared at each other, both of them silent. But the clashes were visible. Formations lashed against each other, looking like simple streams of pure energy, but being anything but. Each stream was filled with dense runes, intentions, and visualizations. So dense that Amara almost couldn't make them out. They were throwing out bundles of such vast information so fast that every second, they were dumping out more runes and arrays than were contained in Amara's most complex spatial spells. She couldn't imagine how fast their minds were working to compete against each other in a battle of pure complexity and information. Amara knew that John had worked on his mental magic. He had killed a man simply by looking at him, melting his brain inside his skull. She knew that he was capable of incredible things with Psyche, but seeing it like this put it into a different perspective. She was no stranger to complexity. Her aura made sure of that. Still, she had always been heavily limited by her mind, and seeing the amount of information being thrown out made her feel sorely inadequate and horribly unprepared. She wondered what she would do if John attempted to attack her with something like that. Would she be able to resist? Or would it come down to whether or not she could kill him before he could melt her brain? How much would her mana be able to protect her before such complexity? She could see those incoherent tendrils between them become more structured. From John extended a pathway of pure Psyche, a structure that his attacks flowed through. Like circuitry, it reached out toward the maggot and slowly gained ground. The maggot fought desperately, screaming all the while, lashing out with explosions of Psyche in an attempt to drive John back. But with a fraction of the Psyche, John was able to supersede those wanton attacks. Against program magic, the maggot was outclassed. Eventually, John's attacks reached the maggot. That's when he lowered the weapon, taking on a relaxed stance. His Psyche flowed toward the maggot, surrounding its body and shooting into its head with sharp spikes. It stabbed into both its brain as well as the most concentrated portions of its nervous system. Amara could see its neural fibers light up like fireworks. The maggot started thrashing about with its body, slamming its head against the ground with agonizing screams. Eventually, it cracked its own head open, its brain exploding through the fracture, its screams going silent. John just stood there, staring at it a bit longer before humming. "All right then, let's get out of here. I've gotten everything I can from this place." Nobody responded, most of their gazes lingering on the bug a bit longer before they turned around and started walking out. No words were exchanged. Amara noticed Black Blood was dead silent, his body tense as John walked by. The usual quips were nowhere to be found. She could understand. It unnerved even her when she saw John do things like that. She would have no sympathy for the Scourge, but something about being killed like that, having your mind be put through a blender that drove you to such madness that you'd kill yourself just to end it, made her shiver just thinking about it. She had thought similar things when they encountered a death shrine for the first time. It was an unnatural way to die. She had seen enough death in her life from both humans and Scourge to be numb to it. Still, both humans and Scourge handled death in a normal fashion. What John had just done overstimulated the same part of her brain that felt like it was being fried the first time she had seen a person be torn apart alive. That part of her brain hadn't reacted to anything for a long time. Seeing this made that part light right back up. She followed behind John as they left the nexus, not noticing how wide her eyes were as they walked.